Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on the benefits and impacts of autonomous vehicles on underserved communities, brought to you by the Bipartisan Policy Center. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Pete Bigelow, the Director of Technology and Innovation Coverage at Automotive News, the host of the Shift Mobility podcast, and your moderator for today's discussion. This conversation comes today as the Bipartisan Policy Center issues a new report on the equitable deployment of autonomous vehicles that is available at bipartisanpolicy.org. The report examines how your efforts can help ensure that autonomous vehicles, aka self-driving cars, aka robotaxis, can responsibly, safely, and equitably be deployed and integrate into the communities where they operate. To set the stage for today's discussion, Congressman Darren Soto from Florida's 9th Congressional District has recorded some introductory remarks. He currently serves on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, is co-chair of policy for the Future Forum Caucus, and we'll go ahead and play those now.
Hey, I'm Congressman Darren Soto. I want to thank the Bipartisan Policy Center for giving me an opportunity to talk about a topic we work a lot on right now, which is autonomous vehicles. Did you know that in Central Florida, in our district, we have a company called Beep, and they've been running the longest serving public autonomous vehicle transit in the nation, way back in 2019. Well, obviously that wasn't that long ago, but we've seen the work that they've been doing and others throughout Central Florida and across the nation, like Waymo and Google and so many others. The truth is, we have so many folks in Central Florida, 2.7 million in this large area, and we're just developing some of our commuter rail. And so we need various different ways to get folks from A to B, whether it's going to their job, whether it's seniors trying to go to a medical appointment or go shopping, whether it's our young people and persons with disabilities. And so as we build out more highways, as we build out our airport, as we build out our commuter rail and our local bus system, which is absolutely critical, we're never going to be able to do it all. You know, we have counties that are over 1,000 square miles, 2 of them in our area. And so the way we look at autonomous vehicles is they're going to be key to the future of a lot of the short-term travel. You get to that train station, you get to that bus station, but you still have a mile to go or 2 miles to go. And so that's what Beep and other autonomous vehicle companies in and around the district have been doing, that last mile or two. And so in Lake Nona, that's where we have our VA hospital. And so it's been helping veterans get to their appointments and help families and seniors get to the VA hospital and other points around Lake Nona. We also have one that connects the downtown bus station at Lynx to Creative Village, where EA Sports is, where we make the famous Madden and the college football game that's coming up soon from EA Sports. So look out for that. And so this is able to help with getting folks in those last couple of miles. Look, there's going to be a lot of major issues as we navigate through autonomous vehicle adoption. First, public safety is absolutely critical. It's going to require the NHTSA and the U.S. Department of Transportation to continue to work on both waivers and for Congress to step up. And I'm proud to be on the Energy and Commerce Committee where we're working on those rules of the road. Although, you know, Congress, it never moves as fast as we'd like, and so we're still working through those. And so NHTSA has been really key to work with us on waivers as we're building out autonomous vehicle systems throughout the district. Another key issue is equity. We want to make sure as these vehicles are being built out, they're going to neighborhoods that are in need, and not just affluent neighborhoods, and communities of color and folks who also have mobility issues. When I think of mobility and I'm thinking of transportation, I'm thinking of our veterans, our seniors, our young people, our persons with disabilities, because in large Central Florida, not everybody has a car. Another key part is workforce. We know we're still going to need bus drivers, we're still going to need train operators and pilots and all these other folks who help keep transportation going strong. But we know some of it will evolve and change over time. And so I've urged a lot of our autonomous vehicle companies to work with local workforce advocates, to negotiate with labor unions, to work with folks who are apprehensive about this slow transition over time, to make sure there's a place in the workforce for folks, because we're still going to need folks running the systems that these machines are operating on for the foreseeable future. There'll be conductors nearby to help out with safety. And so as we look at all these things, it'll be absolutely critical. And then it's access through education, whether it is learning through apprenticeship programs how to fix autonomous vehicles, or whether it's going through with computer programming, or getting 4-year or PhDs in autonomous vehicles and in technologies that are really critical, that we have a diverse workforce of folks getting access to this education. One of the areas that we work on quite closely here in Central Florida is with the sensors and with LiDAR and cameras and radar, because you need a redundancy of all three of these to truly make sure we have safe autonomous vehicles. And so I'm really excited that you got to, that you invited me to be able to discuss this critical topic. We look forward to working in a bipartisan fashion on the IDC Committee on Energy and Commerce so that we could slowly, methodically, safely, equitably, and inclusively move forward autonomous vehicles in the nation and across the world. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you to Congressman Soto for that message. Next up, you're about to hear from Waymo, which is the Google-backed self-driving tech company that is commercially operating in Arizona and Northern California, with plans for a big expansion in the very near future. So let's go ahead and play our video from Waymo now.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Ready? Yeah, ready. We're gonna start the ride. Everyone buckled up. Okay, let's go. Wow, is it going to talk us through the ride?
It is. It's going to give audio cues throughout the ride. It's an accessibility feature for users that are low vision or blind. We build the Waymo driver, which is how we refer to the suite of hardware and software that collectively are capable of performing all of the dynamic driving tasks. Essentially, the sensors, which are a combination of our vision system, cameras, LiDAR, and radar, paint a picture of the world around the vehicle and are making obviously predictions on what to do next. The Waymo driver is assessing the surrounding, it's seeing the pedestrians, the vehicle next to us.
So it's really cool how we do have a specialist in the car with us, but just how the wheel is turning on its own, it's navigating as the driver. This is really exciting about the autonomous vehicles, just being able to fully drive themselves. No human has to step in and take control at any point in the ride, which is awesome. I think just out of precaution, DC has regulations in place just to keep someone in the seat for now while they're doing testing, but this is really exciting to actually see real in live.
And there's just so many benefits, particularly for folks who can't drive or don't want to drive. We do a lot of work within the Waymo Accessibility Network and our partners within the accessibility community. This is really life-changing technology for people. It's a computer that will pick up whoever calls it to wherever they want to go, as long as that's within our operating domain.
It does operate so smoothly, and I don't know, it just feels safer just because it's coming to a very slow stop and it won't go past the speed limit. So that does feel better than what I thought I'd feel in one of these cars.
I'm very glad to hear that. We're slow and steady. For example, we saw this motorcycle pass by. I would not have seen it, but the Waymo driver's capability of seeing
the biker right outside of us.
Right, 360 degrees over 3 football fields around the vehicle. Much better driver than I am, for sure. We're really excited to be able to provide EV as a service, transportation as a service, make those sustainability benefits accessible to more people. What did you think?
That was great. Yeah, it felt super human.
I know, right?
It felt really safe. It felt really cool just to also see people around DC waving at us, what is this new thing driving by us? So shocked, but it's really great.
All right, that's a great lead-in for today's discussion. And to segue into that, I'm pleased to introduce our esteemed panelists, Dr. Alante Whitmore, Director of Autonomous Vehicle Initiatives for the Coalition of Reimagined Mobility at Securing America's Future Energy, also known as SAFE. Finch Fulton, Government Affairs and Policy Advisor at K&L Gates, and a board member at Partners for the Automated Vehicle Education, also known as PAVE. And Brian Woolfolk, Principal with Swan Creek Strategies and author of a report titled Autonomous Vehicles, Leveraging Technology for Diverse Community Benefit. Brian, I have no organizational acronym for you, but nonetheless, this will be a great discussion. And just as we kind of get started, I've briefly introduced the three of you, but Alante, perhaps we can start with you. If we could just hear a little bit more about your bio and the vantage point that you're coming from as we enter into this discussion today.
Absolutely. And thanks, Pete and the Bipartisan Policy Center for having me. Again, my name is Dr. Alante Whitmore, and I've been a part of the Coalition for Reimagined Mobility for the last 2 years. And since 2014, the AV initiative here at SAFE has led the effort to study and quantify the societal benefits of autonomous vehicles. And my passion and expertise began about 7 years ago when in my doctoral studies, I earned a joint PhD in civil engineering and engineering and public policy at Carnegie Mellon. There, my dissertation research explored the ethical, economic, equity, and environmental impacts of shared autonomous mobility. And so I'm really excited for today's conversation because when we think about how we're integrating autonomous vehicles into our existing transportation system, and it's really important that we are thinking about accessibility, also maintaining cost efficiency and ensuring that we are serving and benefiting those a host of underserved communities by doing so. So really excited for today's conversation.
All right, thank you, Alante. Finch?
Hey everybody, I'm Finch Fulton, former House and Senate staffer, and I recently came from an autonomous trucking company in Pittsburgh. But most relevant to this conversation, I spent 4 years as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy and the nominee to be Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Transportation, where I helped lead the Accessibility Strategic Plan and had the innovation portfolio. So all of the automated vehicle guidance document updates and rulemaking progress, that was a key part of what I worked on. So accessibility has been a key part of how the federal government considers this. It is a federal priority to ensure accessibility for AVs and for all transportation methods. And I look forward to this conversation.
And Brian?
My background starts in technology, working on the Hill, really from a civil rights and constitution perspective on the House Judiciary Committee in the 90s, and seeing different evolutions of technology policy from the Telecom Act in 96 to antitrust and various other proceedings. But, seeing a real challenge in getting underrepresented community perspectives engaged in those debates and in the design phase as those technologies were being deployed. And so progressed to autonomous vehicles, and I've worked on various tech issues over the years, and seeing really the opportunity of autonomous vehicles in meeting some of the needs of these communities that haven't had the focus that they've really deserved. Safety, equitable access to employment and groceries, and all of those things that a lot of us take for granted. So I'm excited about the conversation, and I'm very appreciative of the Center for taking a look at this and being the deliberation that we need as a community.
All right, thank you, Brian. Well, as we get going here, audience members, I'd like you to know that we welcome your questions. Please submit them using the live chat on YouTube, and we will get to those shortly. But to kick things off here, I feel like this is a really timely conversation because, as the three of you know, yesterday in California, there was a Senate Bill 915 that has been really important, really important part of this conversation, and it got shelved. It would have really affected the way that communities had the authority to interact and regulate perhaps autonomous vehicles operating in their jurisdictions. We don't need to go into the weeds of the bill necessarily, but perhaps with that as the backdrop, I'll kick this off by asking, what is the relationship today between robotaxi companies and the communities in which they're operating? Alante, why don't we ask you to kick it off?
Sure. So I think that the relationship is that there's a great opportunity. I think sometimes AV technology can be purported as a hammer in search of a nail, but I think there are a lot of nails in our country that need a solution. And so I really think of robotaxis as a wonderful opportunity to not only expand existing transit coverage by extending service, maybe serving areas with lower density where public transit is not available or feasible or viable, or also maybe might have issues with topography or other reasons why our 40-foot buses are not a good option there. Additionally, they also provide a new way to access social safety nets like healthcare or other social services. And I think the wonderful opportunity there is that we can expand a community's suite of mobility options to get to whatever it is they need to access. And when we do that, we're also addressing the needs of those with like the greatest unmet transportation needs.
Brian, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating question. I think the relationship with community is a key relationship. It's a key stakeholder relationship, but it's also a key opportunity for the companies. Because if you look at the way demographics are expanding, as we talk about these issues today in 2024 about underserved communities or underrepresented communities, these communities are going to be the majority of the country in a few years. And as these technologies are deployed and as they develop economic models, without engaging these communities as key stakeholders, none of these ventures will survive. I think the challenge also becomes the fact that when you're talking about technologies that are futuristic and aren't necessarily tangible today, it makes it so the access to the policy engagement becomes limited to those people that are knowledgeable about transportation or technology policy. One of the greatest challenges is that we have to expand that and speak in plain English to everyone and engage everyone into the real values and potential of the new technology. And I think some of these companies are doing an excellent job. I mean, a lot of my knowledge comes from visiting Waymo once and seeing what these technologies were capable of. And I think more of that needs to be done. It's done ad hoc right now. We need to do more of it.
Finch, if I could ask you for a little historical perspective on this, I think in certain cities there's some trepidation about the rollout of autonomous vehicles because of the way that Uber and general scooter companies came into the transportation scene. So how does that kind of affect the rollout of AVs, and perhaps how does it go better this time around?
Well, certainly ride-sharing services moved quickly, but that's certainly not the case for automated vehicles and robo-taxis. They've been working on this technology for about a solid decade. They've been engaged from the city level, the state level, and certainly at a federal level in the areas that they are looking to deploy and to test. And look, California is wrangling with the basic question about federalism. Who do you have to get approval from to be able to deploy in different areas? California is wrangling with trying to bring it down to the most local level, but in reality, you have to make sure that the different levels of the government have different roles that are understood about who says yes to what. For vehicle safety, you have to go to the federal government. If you're looking at licensing requirements and reporting requirements, you got to go to the state. There is a role for the city and certainly even the county, but it's not to have every single person that has 20 other jobs in their normal day-to-day life to now become an expert in all these areas. Everybody has their role, and by trying to get all of the roles to the most local level, you crush them with all of the responsibilities and requirements. There's no way they can know everything they need to know. So there's a balance, and California is dealing with that balance. So it is the role of the AV companies and those that are testing this technology to make sure they have comfort, to make sure they're doing outreach, to make sure they're bringing the community in. So there is that level of comfort they can test and deploy in a safe and responsible manner and bring in the community, because I know we've talked about it. You're not only testing the technology and making sure it's absolutely safe. At some point, you have to test the commercialization and whether or not you can actually make money by deploying in these areas. alienating all of your potential customers is not a good business plan. So it's not something that you think these companies would be doing, and certainly is not something I've seen any of the companies I've talked to doing today. So it's a balance.
You know, the premise of our conversation here is that AVs are going to enhance existing transportation equity. Can we level set on what is the current state of mostly non-autonomous transportation? How are the needs of people being met today in underserved communities? And then, you know, we've addressed a little bit what is the potential for AVs to enhance that. But what is the state of affairs today?
It's not good. First of all, nearly 1 in 5 people have disabilities in the US, whether it be visual, audio, auditory, cognitive, or mobility impairments. About over 25 million have transportation limiting disabilities that prevent them from moving around. The Department of Labor has publicized the fact that but for transportation requirements, there'd be 2 million more people with disabilities that would be employed today. Those are jobs that are needed to be filled by people with skills, but for some sort of injury or permanent disability, they can't move around. And this is not something that affects other people. This is something that affects you and me. The majority of Americans will have transportation limiting disabilities at some point in their life. And that's not even including any of the disabilities that come with aging. So that's outside of the aging process, which is very normal and expected for all of us. Even as we look at geographic equity, 2/3 of communities don't have access to public transportation systems that can be of service to people with disabilities. So we're talking about, Alante was talking about ability to access public benefits. We're also talking about ability to get to your medical care, your ability to get to your worksite location. Public transportation alone is not enough, especially if you're talking about areas that don't have dense populations, where it's not really feasible to put these systems everywhere. So this technology can make things more accessible for people. And we're not even talking about the safety aspect of things yet, but I'm sure some of my colleagues will.
Brian, you want to pick up the baton from there?
I think Finch laid it out very well. I mean, there's no shortage of data showing that there are extreme differences between those that have access to transportation and those that don't. And it's amazing how much many of us that have access just naturally take for granted the fact that we have access to this transportation. One of the starkest stats that I found when I was doing some research on the issue was the fact that, you know, even people with sick children hesitate to take children to pediatricians because they don't have access to reliable transportation. So they don't take them to pediatricians. Those that are transportation insecure, that are diagnosed with cancer, delay or avoid chemotherapy because of the high need of transportation. The safety issue, as Finch alluded to, you know, is stark. We're talking about 2, 3, 10 to 1, you know, where certain communities are impacted by traffic safety issues, that the traffic deaths, accidents, and it's almost as if, you know, we talk about this technically, but it's hard when you read these stats to look at these as just simple stats. These are all capitalized and deserve emphasis, and this should be a national priority way more than it is.
And Alante, I'm curious, as we think about the state of affairs right now, what's the state of transportation affecting communities in terms of the noise that they bring, in terms of the pollution that they bring, and how do you see AVs making a dent on that side?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, air and noise pollution is a public health concern across our nation. And when we think about the opportunity for electrified autonomous vehicles, which I want to also maybe do a quick level setting, right? We're all assuming that passenger autonomous vehicles are electric, and most companies are operating in that way at the passenger level. And so with that assumption in place, we can have a lot of really substantial reduction in not only air pollution, but also noise pollution. Air pollution, that means people who are experiencing asthma or other air-related health issues are able to then have better, cleaner air to breathe in their areas with electric autonomous vehicles. A study I did last year, we took a look at just less than 10% of a fleet in one city becoming electric shared autonomous vehicles, making almost a 60% reduction in air pollution. Additionally, in the noise pollution side, we don't always think about noise pollution being an issue. I'm from a loud city that I love and sometimes miss that noisiness. But in truth, it actually is a public health challenge, and it's a high on our list of things we need to address. In that, when we're able to use electric vehicles, which are much quieter than our internal combustion engines that we're used to now, we also have a reduction in noise, which then creates less stress, reducing stress for individuals. So a quiet and clean community, as far as clear air community, is a really great benefit. And typically areas that are high air and noise polluting are also areas where there are lower income communities. And so it's really a great equity advantage for having autonomous vehicles in those communities.
We have seen autonomous vehicle deployments in places that we mentioned before, like San Francisco, like Phoenix, also smaller towns and cities like Sun City, Arizona, Grand Rapids, Minnesota. Do any of you see successes so far in those cities, big and small, in terms of advancing equitable transportation?
Yes.
Alonso, go for it.
Absolutely. I'll add one more to the list, which is Arlington, Texas. They are actually home to the first on-demand autonomous transit system, and they've been successful in integrating it into their micro transit network. And so I think that it's a really great example of how they can not only increasing equity, but also increasing access, and doing so by matching that service to that existing need there. They're also leveraging public and private partnerships to create the solution that's needed. And they did a great job of engaging the public. And so I think that's one really wonderful example amongst the crown jewels you shared already, Pete. But I think there's so much that we have done so far that helps lead the path towards more deployments.
Fitch, it looks like you want to jump in on that.
I was just saying, it's still early days, right? And so it's really hard to say these use cases are ubiquitous. But I think of the villages in Florida where you're seeing automated vehicles provide services to the elderly just to help get around their communities, right? This is critical for being able to get to the grocery store easily, for having an on-demand service that can help move people around, that can be staffed theoretically 24 hours a day to help people move around. Now, this is just a pinpoint. This is an anecdote more than a widespread study that shows it. But I mean, when you look at this and you look at, the issues that we find with people demonstrating higher levels of loneliness and how that can lead to depression and what that means for quality of life, the ability just to get out and move around is critical for people, much less somebody that's older that's dealing with some of these issues. I point back to also that Harvard study back in 2015 that showed that transportation is the single largest determinant of social mobility. If you don't have that, if you can't move around and take advantage of opportunities, you lose out on things that can otherwise make your life better for the long run.
Curious, the word that I take away so far from our discussion is access to jobs, access to health, access to social mobility, as you just described, Finch. Is there something that autonomous vehicles bring just in terms of not having the same potential for discrimination that certain human drivers of taxis, of rideshare vehicles might bring? And is that one positive here where transportation gets advanced and more equitable? And Brian, I'll leave that to you to tee off.
Well, I think it's definitely an evolution in non-discrimination in transportation access. If you look at rideshare companies, for example, and looking at how they were deployed, and the fact that now all of a sudden customers were known by the drivers, and there was access to rideshare companies, and people that looked like me didn't have to go through the traumatic experiences that I went through for years trying to get a cab in DC or New York and all these different places. The challenge is that there's still discrimination, in some of those deployments, unfortunately, when you have people involved. And getting to another point where, you have rideshare companies that are hopefully deployed, and we have to make sure that this happens to every community and provide access to transportation to every community. That's a huge jump in the evolution. Now, the other part of that we'll need to make sure that we take care of is ensuring that access also provides itself with regard to affordability, because affordability becomes a surrogate for a lot of these race and and unrepresented communities. And the determination of what models are deployed and whether they're affordable or not also become big determinants on whether there's equal access or not.
What are the incentives, or maybe in more blunt term, what are the carrots and sticks that need to be put in place via policy to ensure that service is rolled out to underserved neighborhoods, ensure that it's rolled out in an affordable way? Alante?
So I don't know if anyone else has finished Bridgerton this past week, but I think about having a good match. It doesn't have to be a love match, but a practical match between where the need is and where our need is in the technology. And so I share that like as really the point. We have to be really clear and have a very clear understanding by engaging multiple stakeholders into exactly what those needs are and using that to influence our policy to then communicate and work with our autonomous vehicle companies to match the need that's there. I think that is going to be the pathway to a positive outcome.
And Finch O'Brien.
One, I love the Bridgerton reference because my wife is pulling me through the whole series, so I'm almost caught up. But I think it's critical to think about what's going to be the use case that will have widespread adoption and will be able to keep these automated vehicles running nearly continuously. I agree with Lante that these aren't going to be a panacea for everything all at once, especially not in the very beginning. But as we find each of these individual use cases where there is capability and is the need to improve on existing service, that's where we'll find the first ability to provide carrots. And it may be working with your local VA to provide that routine service to the center. It may be getting out into the neighborhood and making sure you have people set up for appointments and have the vehicle waiting on them. But certainly when we get to the full, impact of this technology, it's going to be the ability to provide spontaneous service. So people don't have to plan days and days ahead of time so that they can have an accessible ride to get to the hospital. The dream comes when they can do it with very short notice and they can have a vehicle that will come to them door to door, come to their door. They can, let's say they're in a wheelchair, wheel on, have the automatic restraints come into place, and then they can get to their location and have the system be able to tell them where to go to get to the door, drop them off at the nearest point, and make sure they can get there safely. So we're not going to start out with the full picture all at once, but that is the golden star that we're aiming towards.
That plays perfectly into the first audience question that we just got from Michael Steiner, who writes, wouldn't it be amazing if every person in need could receive an immediate AV ride versus waiting 2 or 3 hours for a human access service? So how close are we to that gold star ambition you just laid out, Finch? And maybe on top of that, are we doing something novel if a human attendant is still required to help people who have disabilities get on board and ensure that they're safe?
So I can start by talking about the accessibility strategic plan that the Department of Transportation put out in 2020. One of the key components of this was the research on the automated wheelchair restraint system, right? There's a big problem with the ability to have, even manual restraints for wheelchairs because there's all sorts of different sort of wheelchairs with all sorts of specifications, and there's not a uniform latching mechanism or securement mechanism. Now we have standards, and there's a lot of work that the University of Michigan Transportation Research Center is doing around this, but we have to make sure we're bringing those standards in, have to make sure that we're making them more uniform. This is one of those very basic research needs and standardization needs that will come into play and sure will benefit automated vehicles, but will also benefit paratransit, and most importantly, it'll benefit the people that are actually using the wheelchair. So that research is underway, but another one of the initiatives that we kicked off at the DOT was the Transportation Accessibility Strategic Library or Standards Library, where you have one place to capture all the accessibility standards that are relevant to vehicles of any kind, automated vehicles, paratransit vehicles, conventional, upfitted vans that are made to be accessible. So you have all of those tools in one place so people know what those standards are, and we can drive towards the universal accessibility standards that are going to be needed, again, not only for automated vehicles, but for conventional vehicles. And that will make sure that you're taking care of the ADA requirements that are very rightfully in place to make sure that any sort of federal dollars in public transportation can benefit all users. So that is something that's not done and that we're not satisfied with, but that's critical work to opening the door for a more accessible transportation system for all in the future.
All right. A quick reminder to our audience to please submit your questions using the live chat on YouTube. We'll continue to get to those as they come in. Brian, I'm curious, as we talk about this access to health, and I think Finch termed it in a good way. Like there's these high ambitions, but there's also a practical reality, at least in some ways, of the way autonomous vehicles are rolling out, that they are rolling out in trendy neighborhoods. They are cost-wise on par with some of the human-driven ride-hailing services. So big picture, how do we avoid these just being a shiny new toy for certain people? And how do we really kind of continue to ensure that they fulfill these big transportation goals?
Well, I think, first of all, what we're going to have to do is Alante described and kind of targeting where our destination will be. And being very deliberate and intentional of figuring out, what that perfect world looks like. And then thinking outside the box and providing, subsidies where subsidies are needed, providing, regulatory speed of deployment where that's needed, using all the tools necessary to get to the point and to manage a transition to the level where we're getting what we need to get and we're getting to the access point that we need to get to. Because like you said, the system fails if it's just a shiny new thing that, only a few people with means are able to access. We do have, significant subsidy of transit in this country now. But even evolving that and going through a transition will be not an easy thing to do to get to autonomous vehicles. But we're going to have to figure out a way to do it. And it has, going back to one of your other questions about some of the needs and some of the challenges, if people aren't getting healthcare, if people aren't getting, to their jobs safely, because pedestrian safety is such an issue that impacts this. There are a lot of life and death issues that they aren't able to be gainfully employed because they don't have access to transportation. These should be, hefty enough issues for us to pay what we need to pay, to subsidize what we need to subsidize, and to organize what we need to organize in order that we create a system that meets these needs. It's got that type of potential. The ROI is where it needs to be. We just need to, commit to it as a priority.
You mentioned a lot of things that I want to kind of dive into and explore these nuances and wrinkles. Maybe one at Alante, I'll pivot to you on is, what exactly is the role of autonomy with existing transportation services in public transportation? Is autonomous complement that, part of that, competitive to public transportation? How do those two things go together or not?
Yeah, I absolutely think they go together. In my dissertation research, it was organized such that autonomous vehicles were complementing existing transit. I think there's a wonderful opportunity to expand our transit. And as I shared kind of in my earlier remarks, autonomous vehicles can extend transit systems where buses are not a viable option. I think of it as the opportunity to right-size our transit system. There are places where we need to have what we have, our articulating buses that serve hundreds of people every hour, but there are also areas that maybe don't have that same population density, but still have a latent transit demand. And there's a need for transportation there. And our goal is to give everyone access to the things they need to be at. As we shared already, the plethora of places that folks need to be, and it's critical they have access to. And so while understanding that our system, maybe is not most cost efficient for service to extend that area with that same vehicle, the bus specifically, a traditional bus, we now have a new suite of options between 4, 6, 12, 15 passenger autonomous vehicles that can then adjust as needed given the population density in an area. Additionally, I want to think about how we are all moving around our world in different places and how people may move from the suburbs into the city and vice versa, and the ability to actually respond to that change in density much more quickly with autonomous vehicles as well. So I think there's an opportunity to also ebb and flow as our world and society does much more quickly with this new technology.
Finch, can you piggyback on that a bit? Do you see a business case for autonomous vehicles in areas that are less dense from a population perspective? And does that work?
Certainly, but I think it's also one of the biggest conundrums for AVs. When you're talking about routine trips to places where people go infrequently, but when they need to go, they're on a set timeline, the number one area is airports. But in that case, the automated vehicle would be competing against taxi drivers, Ubers, Lyfts, and your neighbor or your cousin that would otherwise be bringing you. But, even if you look at train stations or bus stations, in DC, we're blessed with a great metro system. So it can be access to the very end point, the furthest reaches of the metro system, where they're never going to expand the metro system further, but you still need a way to get there just so you can get into the city in the first place. You wouldn't want to take an AV the entire way through all the traffic to get there, but you'd certainly like to get to that endpoint. And I think is what we've seen over the years with ride sharing services, there are some cases where they supplement the transit system and there's some cases where they have replaced it. And to some extent, that's okay, because as long as you're giving people the choices to get where they need in the way that best suits them, you're doing the right thing by increasing their mobility. And also, one of the key things that circles back to safety is, Mothers Against Drunk Driving did this study that showed that there was about 39% reduction in the term was motor vehicle crash traumas in areas that utilize the ride sharing services. Actually, it was the Journal of American Medical Association that published this. So nearly a 40% reduction in drunk driving crashes. Now, we're all up to date on the statistics. You're talking about in this most recent year that we have numbers, about 41,000 Americans died on American roadways. Nearly a third of them were in drunk driving crashes. And another third were speeding. And then you have a significant portion that had to do with distracted driving, drowsy driving, and the like. Now, obviously, there are many cases where the drunk driver was also speeding, so there's overlap. But one of the key things that for some reason is debated is a NHTSA statistic that showed that the critical reason, the last event in the crash causal chain, was caused by human error in 94% of the cases. So it may not be the only reason. It may have been dusky and low visibility, and maybe it had been raining. Maybe the road was too wide or not wide enough. But if that driver was drunk, that is the final key, right? Automated vehicles aren't going to be perfect, but they're not going to be notably drunk. They're not going to be speeding, and they're going to be following the rules. So there may be issues where, the system has something happen, or as we've seen, an uptick in rear ending where other people were tailgating automated vehicles and they ran into the AV. I get that. But if you can remove that final piece in these major fatality driven crashes, we can save a lot of lives. And for people to criticize AV companies because they target that very logical reason, it's not the only reason of a crash. But for that drunk driver, though, there wouldn't have been that crash. And so if we can replace those drunk drivers, if we can replace those speeding drivers, we can improve safety, right? And it doesn't have to be you that you're worried about. Think of it replacing that 16-year-old driver or that 86-year-old driver. Those are some of the people that can benefit from riding in these automated vehicles that benefit all road users. So I think it's critical to take it all in context and not get fired up about one stat. It's critical if you can replace these areas of the drunk, distracted, drowsy, and speeding drivers, you can make a world of change. And that in itself is worth doing.
I want to parlay that into something that Brian mentioned earlier and take it outside the vehicle to pedestrians. We've seen within the last month, the Smart Growth America organization has published their annual Dangerous by Design report. Pedestrian safety is kind of reaching crisis levels in America right now. I think roughly 7,500 pedestrians died last year. And one of the quotes that I found most interesting from that study was, quote, "Those who bear disproportionate risk of injury or death are people outside vehicles, people with disabilities, people of color, people walking in lower income neighborhoods." So Brian, do you see a role for AVs in the line that Finch just talked about in improving safety for people outside the vehicle, particularly from those groups?
There is a huge role in protecting pedestrian safety. Part of the reason why you have well, pedestrian safety breaks down into a number of different parts. But one of the reasons why a lot of people are out walking to bus stops and trying to walk to work in areas that don't have the transportation infrastructure to really support pedestrians is because they don't have access to a transportation network within closer proximity to where they live. So when you see people walking, I live in suburban Maryland in Prince George's County, and we've had multiple pedestrian deaths from people crossing a 6-lane highway with not enough crosswalks or stop signs and all of the things that you would expect to protect pedestrians. Autonomous vehicles can see in ways in which a distracted driver can't see. The autonomous vehicle doesn't drink or do drugs. The autonomous vehicle follows the rules as Finch described. That safety for pedestrians and being able to see pedestrians is key. And it's, again, it's a whole different category that's justification enough to deploy this technology because it saves, you can quantify how many lives will be saved based on, not having this driver error. And it's critical to these communities. We don't have and it's much cheaper economically to retrofit these communities and provide the safety that they really deserve from a transportation perspective would cost us way more than it costs to deploy autonomous vehicles.
Alante, how do autonomous vehicles compare from a safety perspective today to human drivers, and what's kind of the rate of improvement that you foresee here going forward?
Sure. I believe there is a Waymo study with an insurance group that shows how much safer driverless cars are compared to the human driver. I'm going to be modest in my estimate, but I know it's above 90% an improvement in safety. And so when we have this opportunity to increase safety in such a meaningful and substantial way, and I know in the world that we live in, so many folks have experienced crashes or have family or friends who have had run-ins with the drunk drivers, we know how important and incredibly what a wonderful opportunity this is for us to really increase safety. And when we start thinking about safety in specific neighborhoods, I think, and even our pedestrians and other vulnerable road users, there's another really incredible opportunity because also autonomous vehicles are driving the speed limit. And certain novel vehicle designs are also intentionally lower speed, which means they're safer than us driving at our typical speeds on the road.
I want to get to another question from our audience here. What are some examples of successful community engagement efforts that are being used today?
Happy to start there. I definitely want to shout out another city, Cary, North Carolina. I believe they had a beep pilot. And I think pilots, opportunities where people can ride the vehicles, experience the technology is the best, in my opinion, community engagement effort to be made because it's such a new technology and it's so new to folks. Like I've ridden with family who literally I've spent the last 7 years doing this work and they're still scared to get in the car with me. It's like, I would not get in this vehicle and be behind this technology if I didn't believe it was safe and better for you. Those opportunities to engage, I think, is the best example and the most effective. And the beautiful thing about pilots and our deployments now is they come with all of this data that shows as folks use this technology, they are feeling more confident in it and they're willing and wanting to ride and use the technology again.
Well, I'll point out initiatives like the Inclusive Design Challenge. The community of people with disabilities of all kinds, they've got a saying that I love. It's nothing about us without us. And so the idea that you bring in people that are impacted, that have these disabilities and are having to deal with them every day to the front end, bring them in the process with the researchers, the people making the standards, the people making the technology, and have them all be part of this process. This was something that we actually structured off of the previous administration's efforts around smart cities, but we structured this to bring everyone together. This administration has embraced the Inclusive Design Challenge and they're building on it because fundamentally it brings the people in that need to be included in the conversations on the front end. So it's much easier to make something accessible when you're building it from the ground up than coming in afterwards and trying to latch on the solutions to a system that wasn't really created with this in mind. So that's a smaller piece of it, and it may not be the sort of engagement that you're thinking, but it's definitely something that should serve as an example for the right way to bring in the impacted community.
And Brian, what do you see as the successful community engagement out there that helps ensure that this is not being imposed upon communities, but really, integrated and built from the ground up with that community engagement?
I think this most successful community engagement, I think we do get some benefit from the challenges with regard to timing of deployment. There's a pretty extensive regulatory process that companies have to go through to deploy these services, and I think that delay, fortunately or unfortunately, is forcing some engagement that wouldn't have happened otherwise. I don't think we had as much with the ride sharing companies. It was quick fight between the medallion owners and the non-medallion owners, but this process is requiring, I think, more engagement, and it should be streamlined, obviously, but it's created practices that I think have really incorporated into these companies' mantras of designing a product that matches communities and following some of these key components, making sure that the first deployed are some of the underrepresented communities, as opposed to starting out with a product that's only deployed to the wealthiest communities, ensuring that there are they're having to start out in closed loops, because they're level 4, and people getting used to that exposure of the autonomous vehicles, and then being able to get comfortable with the technology, as it expands out. But the models that are being deployed, I think, are the right models. I think we just have to keep it up, and I think things get dicier. The more expansive they become, some of the harder issues will have to be dealt with. But I think this is a deployment of a technology that fortunately the companies that are deploying it have the luxury of doing these types of things, and I think they're doing a great job. We just have to keep it up and make it so they're supported in what they're doing.
We're talking on a community level. If I can bump that up for just one moment, Finch, I noticed behind you, you have a sign that mentions the state by state patchwork of laws that govern automated vehicles. Can you explain exactly how that patchwork has impacted the rollout of autonomous vehicles? And does that kind of play into the equity concerns that we've raised here today?
Somewhat. One of the things we found is that there's a great uncertainty about what all the limitations were around. And in some areas, automated vehicle companies just had to comply with the law. In other areas, they had to make a determination as to whether or not to change the technology or seek to change the law itself. And in some cases, they just needed to get clarity from the government that what they were doing is okay. And one interesting example is if you look at nationwide issues, and I may get the states wrong, but in North Carolina, if it's raining, you have to turn the headlights on. And in Arkansas, I think if your headlights are on, or if it's raining, the windshield wipers have to be on and the headlights have to be on. So ultimately, it doesn't really matter to companies. They just know if they sense that it's raining, turn on your lights and your windshield wipers, even though it's not necessarily required everywhere. You have other places like California, where in 2013, they passed a law enabling automated vehicles of all types and telling the state DOT and DMV to get cracking on the rules. They've passed some of those rules, but for autonomous trucks, for example, they haven't put forth the permissive rules to allow it. So because the legislature took action and said, write the rules to enable this technology, but then succeeding administrations didn't do that, they unintentionally put a barrier in place that prevents you from having fully autonomous trucks on the road in California, even though that was the intent of the legislature. So, these issues continue to build. But even in certain areas, there's a requirement in California that you have at least 30 seconds of crash data recorded before any sort of incident. And that's something that I think industry as a whole has said, that's okay, we can do that or more. Many of them already do more than that and capture much more than California envisioned. And so as NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, who regulates vehicle safety, is looking at this, they're already looking at what are states considering for crash data reporting, what is the industry already doing, and what should we just go ahead and make a federal standard so that it's uniform nationwide. It's very interesting as you get into this patchwork, because certainly it's a feature, not a bug, in the American democracy, that many of the states can be test beds for the best way to approach these situations, and ultimately how you want to go about, adopting or hindering new technologies that are introduced into the public. We're definitely seeing different approaches in California than we are in Texas or Arizona, for example.
Alante, if we take that and zoom back down to the community level, what are some of the other barriers that you see right now to kind of smoothly or seamlessly making everything we've talked about today so far happen? If that's not too big of a chunk to bite off at one time.
I mean, on the consumer acceptance piece, I still think that like having the experience is going to be critical for folks to become comfortable with technology. However, I think even the points that Finch is making at that state and federal level is critical as well, because when we have this regulatory uncertainty, also can make consumers uncertain and say, well, if they're still figuring this thing out, that means the technology might not be ready. And so then I have some hesitation. And so I think that we still have to address that higher level piece, and it will trickle down also to our consumers as well. So I think that lack of policy action right now is a barrier even for our consumers and the end user that we have in mind.
All right. Well, our time here is winding down today. So before we get to the end, I do want to ask each of you, we've shared a lot of important insights and information. Is there a key point that each of you want to underscore that you want our audience to walk away from today's discussion with? And what would that be? Finch, I'll start with you.
So I, like many people, am excited about what automated vehicles could mean for our transportation system. And so on one hand, it's worth trying to get people's attention and telling them the promise that these vehicles hold. On the other hand, it becomes problematic if you start expecting them to be everything, everywhere, all at once, right in the very beginning. I think what we'll see is a gradual build out of the use cases of routes that make sense, of different situations where the government might want to be involved, paying for rides, incentivizing activity. But it's not yet at that point. We're still at early days where they're making sure to prove the safety and the efficacy of the technology, as well as the business case itself. So we need to make sure that while we can be excited about the future, we need to be realistic about what to expect of these vehicles today. They shouldn't be a silver bullet or a panacea to all society's ills. But as we get more knowledge and more experience with these, we definitely should make sure that we're pointing them in the right direction to get the policy outcomes that we want, so that we have a better transportation system as a whole in the United States and, frankly, the world.
All right. Thank you, Finch. Brian?
I think the main point I'd like to leave everyone with is the fact that is my hope that autonomous vehicles will become an unsiloed priority for people in health, public health advocacy, for people in civil rights, for people advocating for jobs and employment access. This technology is a tool for a lot of things beyond what we traditionally think of as transportation. And I say that, not necessarily to say that transportation folks don't think of these things, because they do. But I think it's incumbent upon others in other boxes to start thinking of these transportation solutions as critical to the future of their advocacy. Because I think the emphasis and prioritization of AVs, I think we create a much better product if more people are at the table and helping build and helping value this new technology. And that's my hope for the evolution of this issue.
All right. Thank you. Alante, the final word belongs to you.
Sure. My esteemed panelists shared so many of my sentiments, but I'll say AVs are a hammer with a nail, and that there are plenty opportunities here. And in terms of equity, we have a really wonderful opportunity to right some of the wrongs of our history of transportation in this country. And so why not use this tool within our toolkit to really make a better society?
Well, a big thank you to all three of you for your time and expertise today. If we had applause, I'm sure it would be ringing out right now, but such is the case in the webinar. But thank you very much. For our audience, please know that this webinar will be archived and available on the Bipartisan Policy Center's YouTube channel. Should be available later today. And again, the new BPC report that we've mentioned on this topic is now available at bipartisanpolicy.org. And on behalf of the Bipartisan Policy Center, thank you for your interest in the topic and for attending today. We look forward to future conversations and engagements. Hope you have a great day.